of Oslo, Raymond Johansen, the Mayor of Cape Town, Patricia de Lille, and the Deputy Mayor of London for the Environment, Shirley Rodriguez. They're each going to talk about the topics that they find particularly interesting about their city, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe I can start, and it's a kind of a pick and choose session that we can focus on some specific areas, and I have chosen what I want to talk about, that our new climate and energy strategy that passed through the City Council of Oslo just before the summer, and that we set some quite ambitious targets to reduce the emission targets by 50% by 2020 and carbon neutrality by 2030, having 1990 as a baseline for this. So therefore, and it's very ambitious, but therefore we realize that we need to have better governance tool to ensure that the policy measures for mitigation actually are implemented. This is why we introduced the so-called climate budget. Therefore, when we launched our budget in 2017, the city will not simply count money. We will also track carbon emission to ensure that the city's low carbon ambitions are followed by the action. The 2017 city budget have allocated a reduction of 836,000 tons of CO2 relevant sectors in Oslo in the period of 2017 to 2020. It means that we have that the different sectors, I have them here, the different sectors, they have to report back to us how they implement and how they reduce the carbon emission in all sectors. Environmental issues, it's not just an issue for the people who's responsible for environment. It's responsible for everyone, even those who are working in the kindergarten and in transport. So we have 42 specific, and if there's any interest that you can have idea, I can send it over how you can report on these 42 different targets. I think that's one of the issues I want to focus on. Not this time, later on I want to focus on that we have ambitions to have a car-free inner city of Oslo within 2019. Which is also very ambitious, but that's not just due to the climate, but it's to create a lively center of Oslo. I think that's enough for this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Where do I start? I think first of all, I must acknowledge coming here and meeting with all the mayors from around the world, I just proved the point that we are better together. And together we can make progress possible. And that is what I see amongst all the mayors talking about what they are doing in action. Unlike our federal governments that only sign conventions and agreements, we have to do it. I think for me what is important is that besides the carbon emissions, that we all have to work very hard to reduce in our cities, because that directly contributes to the climate change that we see today. We have taken many steps to deal with it, and I'll just give you two examples. Just this morning, we signed an agreement with BYD. We've procured our first 10 electric buses. Through a competitive tender process. They were a successful company. By doing that, we hope that it will assist us to reduce our carbon emissions. But at the same time, we are the first city in South Africa, the first city in Africa to procure electric buses. And we would like to see more cities doing that. And that's why part of the agreement with BID is that they will now open up a factory in Cape Town. They will assemble the buses there. They will produce some local components in Cape Town, creating jobs. But from there, they are able to export it into the rest of Africa. But also to carbon emissions is that when I became the mayor 5 years ago in the city of Cape Town, I found that about 80,000 homes were built by national government from 1994 to about 2005. And they were built without ceilings. They were built without waterproofing the walls. And I mean, it was just to have people live in conditions like that. Very poor people, spending a lot of money on electricity to warm themselves up in winter. And so I decided to do a project to retrofit ceilings in all of those 80,000 homes. I've just done about 8,000 now, 40,000. I've just done about 8,000 now. And we waterproof the walls. And the impact of that, immediately people use less electricity because the homes are warm in winter and they are cool in summer, and the walls have been waterproofed. But also, it cut down a lot on especially illnesses, like TB, asthma, and all of those kinds. So it's got a knock-on effect. And so we're very proud that we are able to save many families lots of money, but also at least we've now reduced our carbon emissions by 5,800 tons per annum just by doing the retrofitting of those ceilings. And then we also, again, for poor people, is that I want to roll out about 500,000, 500,000 solar water heaters on the roofs of people who are sort of middle class, poor people. And we started the project creating lots of jobs in the city. And so far, we have already rolled out about 46,000. So while climate change and while the world is in a crisis with climate change, it also creates opportunities. And I look at all the responses to climate change, what opportunities are there to create jobs, to make sure that we train people and that we build an inclusive economy. So as much as we are all must work harder, the opportunities that's also there with climate change, I think is of a great benefit to our cities around the world. I'll stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very glad to echo Mayor de Lille's comments about being here at the summit and working with a number of other mayors, listening to their ideas and sharing our best practice. It's a phenomenal opportunity, and we've seen some of the activities in London have really just been taken and copied from other cities, and we hope that others will copy what we're doing too. And in terms of what we're doing in London, Mayor Sadiq Khan was elected 6 months ago, so a very new mayor. I'm a very new deputy mayor, only been in post for a couple of months, and my job is to help implement his manifesto commitments. And two key ones that I want to talk about today are one sort of immediate short term and one more long term. The first is about tackling our air quality problems in London. Our air quality is not meeting on NOx the EU standards. So the mayor has moved a very progressive and ambitious package of measures to tackle that poor air quality and to remediate it. And this includes consulting on expanding and accelerating the implementation of what we call the ultra-low emission zone, where cars would have to pay if they don't meet the very highest levels of EU standards, vehicle emission standards. We're also consulting on implementing in the interim what we call a T-charge, a toxicity charge, which means that any vehicle driving into the congestion charging zone, which is the very centre of London, and that doesn't comply with a Euro 4 standard would have to pay an additional £10 charge. And on top of that, we are cleaning up our bus fleet. We, together with C40 and a number of other cities, held an international bus summit yesterday where we unveiled the first hydrogen double-decker bus. We also are also working with BID to roll out 50 or so electric buses, additional electric buses in London. And we have very big plans of accelerating the cleanup of our fleet, retrofitting our existing buses and ensuring that no new dirty diesel buses are procured after 2018, or taxis for that matter. So very ambitious plans, but we're working within the powers that we have. We know that a lot of the action on air quality is also governed by our national government, and we are advocating, lobbying them to also support London and other UK cities in, for example, implementing a national diesel scrappage scheme and changing the sort of vehicle excise duty charges, which is the tax on cars, on new cars, in order to help fund that diesel scrappage scheme. The other area that I'd like to talk about is Mayor Khan's commitment to make London a zero-carbon city by 2050, which translates or allies to the Paris Agreement target of making sure that the global temperatures are well below 1.5 degrees C. And as you heard the various mayors this morning talking about it, Mayor Hidalgo, Mayor Pires, and also Mark Watts explaining the deadline 2020 activity. You know, we have not a long time to take action, and cities are where action can take. So we are now working on developing a route map on how our various sectors can contribute to meeting that target. We currently have a target of 80% reduction by 2050. In London, we have reduced our emissions by 17%. We are actually one of the cities that have managed to decouple our emissions. So whilst we have economic growth, we are also decoupling our emissions. So it can be done. However, that trajectory is not fast enough or aggressive enough, I think, to meet that 1.5 degree target. So the deadline 2020 work is very helpful to us. And understanding how, for example, Oslo is doing its carbon budgeting, I think we're looking to see how that's implemented, because we know that every sector has to decarbonise. Everybody has to play its part. It's very challenging, very problematic. In London, for example, our big emissions and our problems are really coming from buildings. And we know retrofit is a massive problem that we're all grappling with. So that's why I'm here, to learn from other cities on how we might tackle that.
Thank you very much. We'll take some questions.
Good afternoon. Gregory Scruggs with Cityscope. We're a US-based media outlet that covers trends in cities. And last month we were at the United Nations Habitat 3 Summit on cities in Quito, Ecuador, which adopted a document called the New Urban Agenda that some have described as the roadmap to the local level implementation of another UN agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. At the conclusion of Habitat 3, the conference's Secretary General, Dr. Joan Clos, the former mayor of Barcelona, called on the cities of the world to adopt the New Urban Agenda at their local municipal council level. And I'd like to know if any of your 3 cities plan on taking that step or otherwise seeking to implement the guidelines of the New Urban Agenda. And I would just note in the case of Oslo that I recall from specifically the Norwegian delegation describing its efforts to, the city's efforts to take cars out of the city center as part of the Norwegian strategy to meet its goals under the New Urban Agenda.
Question for all. Okay. Does somebody want to start?
Anyone want to start? Do you want to start? Or? Well, I think that I started to mention our energy and climate strategy, and that is also due to the Paris Agreement. That's our answer to the Paris Agreement. That's what we have to do to achieve our goals. And as you rightly mentioned, it's a responsibility for all of us, all different sectors. And therefore we have this climate budget. we have done when it's come to the transition for fossil cars to electric cars. I think we have the highest density of using electric cars throughout the world. Then we have, together with the central government, used different means to achieve that. It's cheaper to drive, and you can also drive in a collective line, and you have to pay less for parking. So we have, during the last 15 years, we have done a lot for having a transfer in for using electric cars. And now we are moving in a new direction, as you mentioned, the car-free inner city. It's not first and foremost a climate measure. It's to create livelihood, because this transition to a green society, it's not just about pain. It's, as Cape Town mentioned, it's about a lot of possibilities that we can create new jobs. And in the future, it's probably not natural that you come along with 5 tons of steel to work. I think it's more natural that you can go by public transport, that you can walk, that you can bicycling. So we have to facilitate for that. And the inner city is 1.7 square meters. It's quite a huge area. And we will start now to take away 600 parking stations in February, March. Of course, it will be difficult. It will be a lot of conflict. But at the same time, we need to create a lively city with close cooperation with business, culture, with the elderly and schools, and we need to establish other kind of activities in the center to make it more attractive in another way. So we need to have a holistic approach to it. I think that's the right way to put it, an holistic way, because the business life will benefit from that. People with asthma and allergy will benefit from that, as you mentioned in London. I think all cities have a big medical problem that we have accepted for many, many years, that people actually are dying because of the emissions, the NOx emission from transport. We have accepted that. And even in a small city like Oslo, we have children that are not allowed to leave the house for 2, 3, 4 months, because the level of pollution are so high that it's risky for their own health. So they need to study at home, not taking part in other kind of activities. So holistic approach, it's a key word into it, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick up on that. It's so true that especially old cities around the world, cities were built for cars, not for human beings. And so all the space, the spatial planning of city and highways around the city and lots of spaces for cars. And what we are faced with as mayors now is, how do you change that city around to have more open green spaces, open roads? We have got a project in Cape Town where once a month we close down certain streets for 2 days over the weekend, and just allow people and children and everybody to come out and play there. And I would like to make that a more permanent feature in the city and take away some of that space that was just being used for cars. Way back about 60 years ago, around the world, some engineers had this plan of building highways around cities. I'm sitting with 4 highways, unfinished highways. They like that for the past 50 years. Nobody's completed them. It was an idea of engineers, and Cape Town was then still a small city. So we have to redesign our cities. And gone are the days where you have got long distance commuting and low density, because that urban sprawl. So we took people further and further away from cities with low density. The future certainly, and this is our new transport-orientated development strategy, is to have shorter distances and higher density. So we have to go up now, so that people don't have to commute those long distances. And so your spatial planning going into the future, I think as city governments who've got the authority over legislation and planning and zoning and land use, we must use that power as cities to direct how our cities need to develop further. We should not just allow a developer because they've got the money to build anywhere, maybe a gated community with big single houses. We should be saying no to such a development and say yes. And if you want to do it, these are the conditions. And I think we need to use our legislative authority as cities more to guide where we need to go to. Of course, we were all in Paris in December 2015, and you could see the visible difference there. All the heads of states came into Paris for one solid week with lots of staff and planes and all of that, and arguing about where a comma must come in the agreement or where a full stop must come. We came together as 1,000 mayors from around the world for 1.5 days, and we could come out with an action plan. So yes, the UN Habitat plan, we were part of that, but it's more an extension of where do we go after COP21. What are the action that need to be taken by us as mayors? Because the national governments can have those agreements of they want to reduce carbon emissions, but that's all talk. We have to do it. So certainly we're looking at all of these instruments and see how we can work together on it. Thank you.
So I'll just follow up from what Patricia was saying about the importance of spatial development. So we're in London, we are now revising the spatial development plan for London, the London Plan. We're also looking at revising the environment strategy, the transport strategy, and the housing strategy. So we're in a very good position, in fact, to make sure that those are integrated and that they look at some of the international agreements that are out there, but and also national policy, taking the aspiration that Mayor Sadiq Khan has of implementing what he calls good growth. So growth that is good for people economically, but also environmentally, not at the cost of the environment. So the new urban agenda has a whole host of goals looking at, housing, water, and climate, for example. So I'm not, London is not able to deliver on the SDG agenda for the UK completely, but we want to make sure that we do as much as we can. We have very ambitious goals, as I pointed out, that the Mayor has said already about a zero carbon commitment by 2050 on climate change, and other very ambitious targets around increasing affordable housing, making sure that London develops well. So we're definitely going to be looking at that through that strategic review approach.
Buenas tardes, soy Romeo Valentín de la agencia Notimex.
Hold on. One second.
Sí, mi pregunta es, ¿qué tan recomendable es cambiar el sistema de transporte público por uno eléctrico en un país como México que todavía produce la mayoría de su energía eléctrica mediante la quema de gas? Esa es mi pregunta.
Well, I can start, I guess. I don't know the specifics of the energy mix in Mexico, but we're grappling with this problem across Europe, everywhere. We use gas at the moment as a sort of transition, and we're looking at how do we increase the renewable energy in the system. So in London, but generally in the UK, how do we have more wind power, solar power, and so on? And so I think we should, that's one area that the Mexican government ought to be looking at. And I thought that I think you do have very ambitious targets around clean energy. So That is one way, but I guess there's always going to be, in some countries, not full decarbonisation or full electrification, but there will be a mix, I guess.
Yeah, totally agree. Norway is, as Mexico, a big oil and gas producer, so we should be happy that people still use gas. But from an environmental point of view, the transition to carbon neutral system and to find the right mix is extremely important. So to switch to electric will be certainly much more effective. And I don't know really enough about the metro and the train system in Mexico City. And of course, I'm quite humble about the fact I'm coming from a small city up in the northern part of Europe, which is quite well organized, and compared to, for example, Mexico City, which I'm very impressed the way that you have been able to lift the ambitions and also to reduce the emissions over the last 10 years. So I think we have to take into account that the challenges and also what you have to do, it's very different. So as an innovative city to C40, Oslo, small city, quite well functioned. What we can do is to come forward with new proposals, new ideas, how to run things, and hopefully it will be possible to export some of this. Let me then very, very brief mention Oslo's Clean Constructions Initiative, because I think we also need to analyze more into detail the greenhouse gas emissions derive, for example, 61% from the transport sector, but 30% of these emissions from transport sector actually come from the construction sector. And the fact that we know that 50% of all the people in the world live in the urban area. We need to look into the construction sector, and then we have some very exciting policy on how to reduce the emission from the construction sector, which is much bigger than we talk about, actually.
I should say, just reminded me what you were saying. So in terms of the transportation system in London, one of the initiatives that we're looking at, which is about how do we have a number of small-scale renewable energy providers, and we're trying to look at how we might hook them up with Transport for London, our transport agencies, buildings, and how they might connect them up so that you start to use renewable energy to power the buildings. Now, we don't have enough renewable energy to completely power the whole tube system, but we're starting to look at some of those things. And what we are looking at is taking off some of the waste heat from the network, the tube network, to power our homes. So you start to see that sort of circularity, that circular economy approach. Now, we're never going to be fully circular, I think, not for a while anyway, but that's certainly an ambition, and starting to look at how these projects might work. And obviously we're doing that by talking to other cities and seeing how do they do it, and we're hoping that our experience might inform others as well, perhaps in Mexico as well.
Okay, thank you everyone. Sadly we have to end for today as we have another session starting, but thank you very much to our panelists, and if you have any other questions, do follow up with members of the press team here.
Pleasure.
Very good.
Yes. Thank you.
You mentioned EU emission standards that you're setting in London. Should Brexit go forward?